people in the pocket to change their behaviour, and if that's what is required for the planet, then that's what's going to have to happen.
On a final note, with Dean Hall and Penny Ashton, call it a symptom of perhaps boredom or genuine interest. The daily press briefings by the Prime Minister and Director of General Health were appointment viewing for some households. It spawned a whole new sport of let's tell the media how to do their jobs through social media in the hours following the briefings. That's including you, Penny. There were huge numbers of keyboard warriors criticising the questions, name-calling of journalists they didn't like, and overall disdain for questions asked. But will many miss it? So you had this duo, the Prime Minister and Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. Did you tune in, Dean?
I did, definitely. And I think what I'd say, it was a perfect example of awesome leadership. And I think regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, I think that needs to be acknowledged, and especially compared to the chaos we saw overseas. And I think that I'm sure both of them and everyone involved will look back and think of all the things they could do better. But I think, and there were mistakes by ministers and things like that at various points in times. But I watched them, and they made me feel confident, and I think that's reflected in how many people, was it 92% said that they thought everything went well, and I think that 90%, they communicated really well. So,
Penny,
I'll miss them, but I won't miss the situation.
Yeah, I know. I was a bit sad that they're both not doing it anymore. Yeah, we watched it absolutely every day. And I got annoyed. I don't want it to turn into the combative fake news, the terrible media like it is in the States. So I want to get that out there right now. I think they do a really important job. They imparted that information really well. I thought Ashley giving a shout out to the media when he did was incredibly classy, knowing that they were being piled on by numerous people at that point. I think that was really good of him to, make it clear.
They're asking questions, Penny. They're not piling on. They're journalists doing their job.
I know that you're going to be, there was some piling on. There was not a skerrick of positivity. And I'm sorry, Andrea Vance wrote a piece in the paper just recently where she said, we don't report good news. We report bad news. No one reports that the plane lands. But let me just finish this. People report that a plane has landed on the Hudson when it's on fire. You know what I mean? Things like that do become positive stories, do become worth reporting. And I felt that they skipped over that a lot. But they have an important job to do, and that is good. But they were on show every single day. And I just felt like, a lot of people didn't understand that you have to get those sound bites. You have to repeat questions in different ways to get the answer that you want for your particular outlet. And I get that. But it wasn't just that. It's just sort of the language of reporting, things like rammed through, backflip, backtrack, all this sort of stuff. When all we wanted was some positivity.
That's been going on for years. It's not unique to the 1PM presser.
Absolutely. And I have said that on this program many times before as well. That there's so much negativity because we have adversarial democracy, and it does my head in. But
it's because, Penny, you, for the first time, saw the inner workings of what a journalist actually does.
I mean, well, yes. And hello, I have had a little bit to do with it all as well, and wasn't just that. It wasn't just that, but I do give them absolute credit for that. But, in these times, it felt like there needed to be a little bit of adapting or some such. But yet, as I said, they got the message out, and we thank them for that, as Ashley did, and I will miss it was a triumph of communications.
Hey, great to have you both on. Dean Hall, Penny Ashton, thank you very much for being with us on the panel. I'm Wallace Chapman. I am back tomorrow, 3:45 for the panel. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the heat goes on Air New Zealand. A charity demands a refund for almost $12,000 of now worthless domestic flights for a cancelled conference. The International Air Transport Association reckons we don't need social distancing on planes or mandatory isolation after touching down. A global pandemic, a popular Prime Minister and a couple of missteps by Simon Bridges, the catastrophic downfall of a national leader. But is Todd Muller the answer? Bridges is a no-show, and same for Treasury, a no-show at today's Epidemic Response Committee. A startling admission from the US President Donald Trump. He's been using hydroxychloroquine for about a week and a half.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Prime Minister is defending Treasury's no-show at today's Epidemic Response Committee, saying there's nothing cynical about it. Treasury Secretary Caroline McLeish was due to appear this morning to answer questions on the budget and Treasury's forecasts. However, she was unwell, and the Deputy Secretary for the Budget was also unavailable as they're on leave. But National says it demonstrates the government's arrogance and dismissal of scrutiny. Jacinda Ardern says Dr McLeish is simply unwell and has offered to reschedule.
We have given very strong advice that when people are sick they should stay home, and I would expect everyone, regardless of position, to uphold that guidance. And of course the offer has been made, as I understand, to appear later in the week.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. National Senior MP Paul Goldsmith has thrown his full support behind Simon Bridges, saying he's confident the party's leader can turn around the latest poll numbers. Last night's Newshub Reid research poll saw National dive more than 12 points to just 30.6% support, putting at least 16 of its MPs in jeopardy. But Mr Goldsmith, who lacks a safe seat, says that won't last.
Oh, look, I've got every confidence in Simon. We've been in an extraordinary situation where the government's had all the attention, but with each passing week, as we get back to talking about how we get out of this economic challenge that we face, I have every confidence that National will be able to do well.
National MP Paul Goldsmith. 81% of school children attended class today, the second full day of school since the lockdown ended. The Education Ministry says the figure is 2 percentage points higher than yesterday. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Principals told RNZ some children are staying home because they or someone they live with have health conditions that make them susceptible to COVID-19. They say others are cautious because they have close family in countries badly affected by the virus, and a few schools were affected by false information about how authorities would treat sick children. The ministry had warned there could be a drop in regular attendance following the lockdown, which kept most children out of the classroom for 8 weeks. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
President Trump has written to the head of the World Health Organization, saying he will reconsider US membership and permanently end funding if it does not commit to substantive improvements within the next 30 days. Donald Trump says the WHO had shown an alarming lack of independence from China in its response to the coronavirus pandemic. The US president says he's taking an anti-malarial drug as a precaution against the coronavirus without any medical evidence that it's effective. Donald Trump has previously promoted hydroxychloroquine as a miracle cure. The BBC's Peter Bowes has more.
Last month, the US Food and Drug Administration said hydroxychloroquine had not been shown to be safe and effective for treating or preventing COVID-19. It issued a warning that some people could suffer serious heart rhythm problems as a result of taking it in combination with other drugs. Immediately following Mr. Trump's remarks, a presenter on the Fox News network, which is generally politically aligned with the president, issued a stern warning to his viewers. Citing a government study, Neil Koutou said the drug would kill people with vulnerable conditions such as respiratory problems and heart ailments.
Peter Bowes reporting. A master carver at Rotorua's Te Puia says the new funding announcement means they can keep the art form alive. The city's tourism representatives met with the Prime Minister and other ministers to discuss the COVID-19 recovery for the tourism sector today. Tourism is the Rotorua's biggest employer, and the government's announced $7.6 million for Te Puia Maori Arts and Crafts Training Centre. Clive Fugel was part of the first intake in 1967 and is now a teacher at Te Puia. He says the money will ease much anxiety.
Because you didn't know whether we were going to carry on with our wānanga, our schools, because we're passing on a very important heritage. As Te Apiranda Ngata once said, it belongs potentially to all of us. It's not just Maori, it's everybody, New Zealanders in the mainstream.
Master carver Clive Fugel. It's 5:04. The All Black and Crusaders captain Scott Barrett has re-signed with New Zealand Rugby until 2023. The utility forward says the disappointment of the All Blacks' 2019 World Cup campaign has motivated him to stick around. The 26-year-old hasn't given in to the lure of big money from overseas clubs just yet.
If I was to go overseas, it'd be the financial draw card, but I know I've got a lot more rugby to play in New Zealand, and I love playing here.
Scott Barrett. Black Caps coach Gary Stead admits banning cricket players from spitting on the ball is going to create challenges. An International Cricket Council committee is recommending a change to the sport's laws in the wake of COVID-19. Players will still be able to use sweat on the ball to help create swing, but not saliva. Stead says it will be interesting to see how much impact the new rules have.
Still being able to use sweat is a chance to get some moisture into the ball to shine it, so it's not completely all lost on that front. But certainly will be a challenge for bowlers in times when even sweating may be difficult.
Gary Stead. English football's Premier League is exploring the use of audio effects and computer-generated fans to improve the viewer experience of watching games in empty stadiums. The league has voted to allow teams to return to non-contact training in small groups and hopes to be able to clear contact training next week as it steps up Project Restart. That's the news.
A crushing political poll.
This is a seriously bad poll for National and a nearly 17-point gap opening up. And it's going to be very difficult to pull this back before the election.
Workers in Queenstown are caught in limbo.
Going back to the UK, it's like leaving in a place where the war's over, straight into the middle of the battlefield.
And the country gets a breath of fresh air during lockdown.
When lockdown to level 4 began, really our air just cleaned overnight and stayed that way.
Fresh to you every day. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from 8 service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine. Isolated showers about the east coast of Northland and Coromandel. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms this afternoon and evening. Just a few light showers tomorrow. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, isolated showers clearing tomorrow morning, leaving fine spells. Bulla and Westland mainly fine. Isolated showers in Bulla until tomorrow afternoon. Cloud increasing tomorrow evening. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland except Stewart Island, mainly fine. Areas of fog overnight and tomorrow morning. Fiordland and Stewart Island, cloud increasing tonight. Patchy drizzle developing tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. You're listening to RNZ National. It's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The future of National leader Simon Bridges coming up, but we begin tonight with a question from a charity to Air New Zealand. Where is the kindness? It comes after children's charity Bellyful finds itself with $12,000 worth of unwanted Air New Zealand credits after it was forced to cancel a training conference in Christchurch this weekend due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The charity just wants a refund. Its volunteers may not be able to attend a future conference, and the much-needed money could be better used supporting needy families through the pandemic. But it says Air New Zealand won't budge. And as Louise Tanuth reports, while the government urges us all to support domestic tourism, frustrated consumers say that's easier said than done.
Bellyful is a charity providing meals for families with newborn babies and sick children, but now they're asking for some charity themselves. The organisation, staffed mostly by volunteers, had a long-planned training weekend booked for this Saturday and Sunday in Christchurch. 61 volunteers and staff from across the country were due to attend, and the event was only financially viable through a grant and fundraising. But now the charity is stuck with almost $12,000 worth of unusable Air New Zealand credit. All CEO Charlotte Delahunty wants is some kindness from Air New Zealand and a refund.
Those credits can only be used in the name of the person travelling. We can't put that money towards another training weekend, because if we have one in a couple of year or two's time, we won't necessarily have the same people attending, and we can't use it towards what we need right now. It means that this is this credit on hold that we won't probably be able to access or use.
Bellyful wants to use the money from the cancelled flights to instead support struggling families during the pandemic, but Air New Zealand won't come to the party.
We're forecasting a 30% drop in revenue for the year, which when you've only got 2 FTE spread over 4 people working part-time all around New Zealand, it's going to be job cuts, and it's the only other option left to us now.
And Bellyful aren't the only ones having a tough time with Air New Zealand. This customer, who asked not to be named, was due to fly London via LA in June. Whilst she did get a refund, she's questioning why the airline took a $500 cancellation fee.
I didn't cancel the flight. If I'd cancelled the flight, then I'd be comfortable with a cancellation fee. But it wasn't me who cancelled it. It was them. Do you mean I don't have any way of getting to London on the day that I purchased the ticket? I don't see it being my fault.
Paul Johns had several domestic flights cancelled due to COVID-19. Now the lockdown is over, he wants to rebook. But he says so far it's been a nightmare.
The flights that have been cancelled no longer appear, so you don't even know which flights have been cancelled. There's no record of how much money is owed to you. No facility to be able to use this credit that you have to pay for new flight. I would have thought within 8 weeks they'd be able to do it. Had to spend more money.
John said when trying to contact Air New Zealand, he was met with an answering machine, whilst his father-in-law spent 4 hours on the phone trying to reach a human from the airline to cancel his own overseas flights. Ray Meldrum also had multiple domestic flights cancelled. He's not happy either.
How much money have I actually got in credit? Where is it? How can I see it? I don't think that I should be having to chase them up asking where my money is. They should be putting it in a place where I can see it. That's normal business practice.
People with flights to or transiting the United States have been offered a refund, but there is no clarification on flights in the other direction to Europe through Singapore. Sarah Duckworth had flights booked to London via Singapore next month. She has been told she can get a credit for next year, but if she wants to cancel, it will cost her.
But they'll charge me $150 for each leg because going through Singapore, apparently Singapore doesn't have the refund policy. I was hoping for a full refund and don't seem to be able to get it.
Ray Meldrum says he has been trying to use his credit, but trying to reach an Air New Zealander on the phone is more hassle than it's worth.
I've got to phone in and wait, and so I'm kind of just not doing it. You know, it's sort of like I don't trust them, to be honest.
CEO of Consumer New Zealand, John Duffy, says since the COVID pandemic, queries on flights have not stopped coming, and everyone's confused. Air New Zealand said late this afternoon it wasn't aware of Ballyful's situation. Ballyful says it has received an email declining a refund from Air New Zealand. The airline has repeatedly declined requests for an interview. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Louise Tenuth, aho.
We would love your feedback on that story. Should Ballyful get their money back? Should Air New Zealand make an exception and give them a refund? You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And I know a few of you are having ongoing problems there. Are you being charged cancellation fees? Let us know what your situation is. Again, text us 2101. And after 5:30 tonight, we'll take a look at international travel and whether it could be 5 years or more before it returns to normal. Simon Bridges' future as leader of the opposition could come down to a crunch call next week after Nationals caucus was left reeling by a disastrous poll. A disappointed caucus will meet next Tuesday with last night's poll and another expected soon hanging over them. Some MPs are mulling their options, but the Tauranga MP is digging in and says he's not going anywhere. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Simon Bridges back to business after a bruising poll last night.
Well, good afternoon and thanks so much, Dougal. I just want to acknowledge you.
The National leader addressing the Otago Chamber of Commerce this afternoon and making his pitch to be PM via video call.
Come back to us in a week or two and we'll be perfect.
But he may not have that long. Last night's News Hub Reid Research poll dealt National a staggering blow, a more than 12-point nosedive to 30% support. And the bad news doesn't stop there. Just 4.5% of the country wants Simon Bridges as Prime Minister, and close to 60% think he is performing poorly.
Polls jump around.
Simon Bridges wouldn't front on RNZ today, but told News Talk ZB sentiment will shift as the public begins to focus on the economy and who's best to rebuild it.
But the phones have been running hot. Not everyone in his own party thinks he's the one for the job.
I mean, if we believe those, there've been rumblings for forever and I was going to be rolled every sort of other week. Look, I don't believe that. I'm the leader and I'm staying that way.
It may not be up to him. The latest poll would see some 16 National MPs turfed from Parliament, almost a third of the current caucus. That's at least 16 MPs motivated and mulling their options. Those without safe seats are at most risk. They include Nationals Deputy Paula Bennett and Finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith.
Oh, look, I've got every confidence in Simon. We've been in an extraordinary situation where the government's had all the attention, but with each passing week as we get back to talking about how we get out of this economic challenge that we face, I have every confidence that National will be able to do well.
A coup comes with risk of its own. Simon Bridges is not one to go quietly, and a bloody leadership battle could send the polls lower still. The party also lacks a shining new hope or obvious saviour. Judith Collins is a long-time aspirant to the top job, but is a polarising figure and has previously struggled to win caucus support. Todd Muller is another option, but lacks name recognition. The party is conservative by nature and its MPs too. But all commentators agree the poll numbers are anything but.
It really is an extraordinary poll for extraordinary times. The Prime Minister has really just taken off.
Under these numbers, you're not going to get your list MPs in.
There is no way back for National on this unless it makes some radical changes.
Something will have to happen.
And that something will happen Tuesday next week. The full caucus will meet that morning. They'll face a crunch decision. Back Mr Bridges to the election or dump him. They'll have some more numbers to consider before then. A new poll from One News Colmar Brunton expected out soon. It could scarcely be worse. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Meanwhile, people on the streets of Auckland say Simon Bridges' performance over the past few months has been disappointing and he's got to go. RNZ spoke to people in Newmarket and Mount Roskill. Many were keen to see Mr Bridges replaced as leader.
He's not doing very well, nobody seems to like him, so I feel a bit sorry for him, really.
I think he has some pretty old-timey opinions.
Well, I think the media's sort of not really given him a fair go in that you don't see much of him, only negative comments, and they're giving the Prime Minister a fantastic marketing exercise. Let's see what happens in November when we'll see what state the economy's in and how popular Jacinda still is.
I don't think he's doing well, and I think he's out of touch with the population and what's going on now.
Bridges is weak, in my opinion, and regardless of what, I don't know, we just went through this huge crisis, right? And I saw a lot of mudslinging coming from him, and I mean, it's sort of what you've seen around the world as well, like you've seen the partisan politics playing out in like countries like the States and stuff. But yeah, it was just kind of shameful, like just seeing him like sling mud across the floor like that.
I think he's underperforming. I think he's let the National Party down, especially over the last few months, and I won't vote National because of him.
How he's performing quite bad, that's my opinion, and his future, well, if he doesn't go back into polls, I don't think he doesn't have any future with the Nationals.
I don't think he's performing well, and I think his future is very limited.
I think it's time for him to move on. I really would like to see the National Party take on some stronger leadership, particularly going into this election where we're facing some really big questions.
But I don't know who would replace him, that is the trouble, and I think if we knew who might replace him, I think that person might have replaced him already.
The National Caucus may have had a sleepless night after yesterday's catastrophic polling, but former Prime Minister Jim Bolger reckons he could have a solution. He believes Todd Muller has the attributes to be a national leader. Muller, who worked in Bolger's office when he was Prime Minister, is understood to have the numbers to roll Simon Bridges, should its caucus make that decision when it meets next Tuesday. Jim Bolger told me, given the combination of the global pandemic, the Prime Minister's popularity, and a couple of missteps by Simon Bridges, the poll results weren't surprising.
Well, it's a dramatic poll, but given the exposure that the Prime Minister Jacinda's had over the last 2 or 3 months, well, since the virus, she performed well. No question about that. Her and Dr. Bloomfield have been very calming figures every day on the issue. I wasn't surprised that she polled very high. Perhaps more surprising, I guess, was the gap between the Labour leader and the National leader, as well as between the parties.
You mean in the preferred Prime Minister stakes?
Yes.
Down to 4.6%, while the Prime Minister is well into the 50s there. Can Simon Bridges keep his job with those kind of numbers?
Well, I don't determine that. That's the caucus. The New Zealand National Party has a very simple approach. The caucus selects the leader, and because they work closer with the people. I'm sure they're having a lot of soul-searching at the moment and trying to determine the way ahead. When I took over leader in 86, of course, there was hero worship of Roger Douglas and David Longy. So I know what that's like, coming up against well-entrenched and very popular at the time, before the crash of the financial markets in 87, and then everything changed and turned upside down. But we're in a different space now. I think one can say, with total honesty, that Jacinda has led New Zealand through the coronavirus very successfully. We will eventually get a vaccine, maybe sooner than later, vaccine that will control the virus. But there's no vaccine to control the climate. There's no vaccine that can get the economy up and running again. That's an entirely different skill base. And you're talking about Todd Muller. Well, Todd, of course, worked in my office when I was Prime Minister, worked with me as a councillor on the University Council of Waikato. He's a businessman of significant experience, working with the biggest company, of course, Fonterra, working with Zespri, the kiwi food exporter, and so on. So he has a different range of skills, but they're going to be the totally relevant skills going forward.
So is he a better leader than Simon Bridges, Jim? Is he a better leader potentially than Simon Bridges for the National Party?
Well, it's not really my job to make that decision. I talk about Todd. I think Todd is an excellent leader. I think he led the caucus position on climate change very well. He worked with James Shaw to get a unanimous vote across the Parliament for a zero carbon bill, which I think is very important. But going forward, the number one issue for New Zealand, in fact the world, is how do we get economies up, growing again and employing people and producing goods. And that's really where one has to say Todd's experience has been before he entered Parliament. He's the agricultural primary industry spokesman now for National. So that was recognised where his skill base is as well. So, but I think more important at this moment is someone who can unite New Zealand and take them forward as we go through the more difficult part of this whole crisis. And that is getting back up on our feet economically and providing jobs and opportunities for people. And Todd has the ability to work well with all across the world, across the line. I mean, he's not that harsh partisan position. He will work with others to achieve the right goal.
I know you say it's not your choice what happens, that's for the internal politics of the National Party, but you're singing Todd Muller's praises here, aren't you? So do you personally think he's the right guy for the job?
Put it slightly differently, if he's asked to do the job, which I was in 86, the caucus came to me and asked me to stand up for leader. If he's asked to do the job, I think he's got all the skills to do the job. I'm very confident in that, having worked closely with him for a number of years, and watched him as he's grown and focused on different issues like climate change, as well as the primary sector. So if you ask the question, has he the skills to do the job, to be a leader for New Zealand, the answer is yes.
When you said earlier that there's probably a bit of soul-searching going on there in the National Party caucus, how so?
Oh, the National Party caucus will have spent much of today's soul-searching, I'd imagine, and last night as well. I mean, you can't face a poll of that description without having to ask a lot of very hard questions, and I'm sure they're all asking very hard questions. I don't think there'll be nasty questions in terms of Simon's role. It's just whether or not Simon can take us to a position where we can be competitive in 4 months' time.
Can he, in your view?
a challenge for him to come back off his low poll ratings and one or two missteps during the virus. It'll be challenging, but as I've repeated about 3 times, these are questions that the caucus has to answer.
What missteps do you think he's made during this time?
No, I'm not going to answer that one for you either.
You said a couple of missteps during this time. What did you mean by that?
No, I'll leave you with that. You can work it out.
So if Todd Muller was to be the leader, who would you pick as a deputy?
I'll leave that to him.
Do you think he's a better bet than Judith Collins, Jim?
If I had to choose between the two, and I've had no arguments with Judith and I've worked with her before as well, I would be choosing Todd.
It is 25 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. Let us know what you think of that. Is Simon Bridges the man to lead National into the election, or is it time for him to be replaced, and why? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And if you do think his time is up, let us know who you think the new leader should be. National says Treasury's failure to front at today's Epidemic Response Committee is unacceptable and is another example of the government's arrogance and dismissal of scrutiny. Treasury Secretary Caroline McLeish was due to appear this morning to discuss the budget and Treasury's forecasts, but pulled out because she was unwell and no other executive with responsibility for the budget was available. It follows Finance Minister Grant Robertson withdrawing from the committee at the last minute last week, and a memo from the Prime Minister's office to ministers to dismiss media requests about a COVID-19 document dump. But Treasury and the Prime Minister say this is just a case of illness and bad timing. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Well, good morning. Welcome back to the COVID-19 committee. We were to hear from the Treasury Secretary.
Simon Bridges opened today's Epidemic Response Committee by putting on record his view that Treasury's no-show was completely unacceptable.
We have some remarkable forecasts from the Treasury, which certain bank economists have described as highly optimistic. These are critical issues for our nation and they deserve scrutiny.
A spokesperson for the Treasury says that unfortunately Dr McLeish was unwell, and the Deputy Secretary for the Budget, who would normally have stood in for her, Struan Little, was away on leave. They say they called the committee clerk early this morning and have been working with them to find a time to appear later in the week. They say they offered to provide written answers to questions they may have in the meantime, and added that Treasury will appear for the usual post-budget review next month. But National's finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says it strains belief that Treasury wasn't able to find anyone else to front. He says there is a dismissive attitude coming through from the government that can only be described as arrogant.
Well, our worry is that it's further evidence of the government's dismissive approach to explaining they feel like they're riding high and they can get away with anything, and that's not going to serve the country well.
But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's not correct to characterise this as a no-show. She says while unfortunate timing, Dr McLeish was following public health advice.
We have given very strong advice that when people are sick they should stay home, and I would expect everyone, regardless of position, to uphold that guidance. And of course the offer has been made, as I understand, to appear later in the week.
Economist Cameron Bagri appeared before the committee today, and he too was unimpressed Treasury didn't front.
And can I just sort of express my disappointment as well that Treasury or someone hasn't fronted today. In fact, I'd go probably a little bit stronger and just say I think it's unbelievable.
Mr Bagri is one of those who believes Treasury's forecasts are too optimistic. He says rather than a more short and sharp V-shaped recovery, New Zealand is in for a U-shaped one.
Now, to get a V, you need to have a big basic assumption that there's going to be no changes in labour input growth, i.e. migration, no changes to the foundations for capital stock growth, i.e. investment, and no changes to productivity growth.
Mr Bagri says he can object on all 3 levels. He says he believes this will be a far more drawn-out recovery process than Treasury is expecting. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And on the subject of no-shows, I should have probably mentioned we did invite Simon Bridges onto the show for an interview. He declined. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Northland schools have the lowest numbers of returning students post-COVID-19. So what's the ministry plan to get more kids back in class? President Donald Trump's been scoffing back an unapproved drug to ward off coronavirus. And the International Travel Association says flying on a plane is safer than going to the mall when it comes to catching COVID. And Queensland tourism operators aren't happy at travel bubbles on the back burner. We would love your feedback on Air New Zealand, on the national leadership or anything else you want to talk about. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
Auckland Council has asked all staff earning more than $100,000 a year to consider taking a 5% pay cut over 6 months. Those earning more than $175,000 have been asked to take a 7.5 to 10% reduction to help mitigate the council's dramatic fall in revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Former Prime Minister Jim Bolger has put his weight behind National's Todd Muller as the future Prime Minister. Last night's News Hub Reid research poll saw National dive more than 12 points to just 30.6% support, putting at least 16 of its MPs in jeopardy. Jim Bolger told Checkpoint the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has led the country through the coronavirus crisis very successfully, but Mr Muller has the skills to do the job. The Education Ministry says 81% of children attended school today. The figure is 2 percentage points higher than yesterday and follows concerns about a drop in regular attendance following the lockdown. The US President says he's taking an anti-malarial drug as a precaution against the coronavirus without any medical evidence that it's effective. Donald Trump has previously promoted hydroxychloroquine as a miracle cure, but officials have warned against serious side effects. A children's charity says it's been left with $12,000 worth of unwanted Air New Zealand credits after the pandemic forced it to cancel a training conference in Christchurch this weekend. The charity, Bellyful, wants a refund. The airline announced yesterday it would only be refunding some cancelled international flights. 16 people have been arrested and Hawke's Bay police have seized drugs, firearms and assets worth around $1 million. The operation by the region's organised crime unit was targeting the sale of methamphetamine and cannabis. The police have reopened a road in Christchurch's Port Hills after a fatal crash earlier today. One person died after a car plunged down a bank on Summit Road, 1 kilometre from Evans Pass Road at about 10:40 this morning. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. You're with Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Giles Beckford. Hi, Giles. So you've been shooting the breeze with the Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr. What has he had to say?
Well, we've had a long chat today, a good 25, nearly 30 minutes worth. This is a standard ploy by the Reserve Bank. Normally they do it immediately after their latest statement, which was last Wednesday, but of course they didn't want to get in the way of the budget. And so we had a chat today. We covered most of the big issues, as you would expect. One of the key things was a commitment from the bank that they're ready to keep doing what is necessary to keep the economy liquid, to keep money going through the banking system, the financial system, and also to keep interest rates low so that the cost of borrowing is affordable for businesses and households. I asked Adrian Orr whether the government's planned increase in its borrowing, as announced in the budget last week, that $190 billion over the next 4 years, whether that would mean the Reserve Bank would have to step in and buy more bonds through their quantitative easing program. He was a little bit coy about it, to use his words. He was tiptoeing through the subject. One of the suggestions is that the $60 billion limit at the moment will be raised, or will need to be raised, to around $90 billion. Adrian Orr says, we'll wait and see. It's possible that we'll have to buy more, but at the current rate, we'll just stick with what we've got. I asked him about negative interest rates, whether there's a prospect that we'll see them, as some commentators have been calling for. He said he wasn't outright saying no. He was saying, not this year, we don't need them. The banks are ready. The bond buying program is having the necessary stimulatory effect for the economy. But, you never say never. These things aren't ruled out. And there are other things in their war chest that they could do to keep the economy ticking over if needs be, to cushion that impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And they include buying a wider range of assets, such as, say, company bonds rather than just government bonds. They could buy assets overseas, and the effect of that would be to keep the pressure on the New Zealand dollar. That would keep it down a bit, which of course is good for the exporting sector. I asked about the possible buying directly from the government of their bonds, so that you cut out the market in the middle. Not so enthusiastic, but once again, not ruled out. It depends on the circumstances. And I said, one of the frequent questions that we have asked of us is, how long will this go on for? And how does the Reserve Bank actually get out of this quantitative easing program? Remembering that banks around Europe, the United States and some in Asia have been doing this for the best part of a decade since the global financial crisis. And he says, well, it's not so hard, really. He says, you just stop buying the bonds. What they're aiming for, of course, is that at a time when the economy is growing, interest rates will have to rise. And so that will take care of some of the costs. It also means that they'll be able to allow those bonds to just mature, in 10, 15 years' time. But you did say it will take decades. One pointed comment, one pointed area where I asked him was, how are the retail banks performing in terms of passing on the low interest rates and also giving businesses and households access to the sort of schemes and loans that are out there? He's used the term courageous in the past. He wants the banks to be courageous in their lending. Of course, we've heard quite a few complaints from people saying the banks are being pretty hard-nosed about some of the decisions they make. And he says, well, I'm not sure that they're being as courageous as they could be. There's a coded message saying, banks, do a bit more. You need to pass on those interest rates. He's looking for a bit more action from the retail banks, making borrowing cheaper and making a broader range of money available to people. So that was should we say, the essence of the conversation we had.
Sounds pretty meaty. OK, let's move on to this new report on the hotel sector. So lots of planned projects, well, they're dead in the water now, are they?
Well, perhaps not dead in the water, although some of them I think will probably be terminal. It's from a research company called Colliers International, who are big into property and know the market pretty well. They're saying that, for instance, there were 27 projects being planned or underway. Another 27 were on the drawing board, so to speak, being talked about. Most of those have come to a halt. It expects that some of those projects will proceed through to completion. Of course, we have been hearing reports of some hotels already closing because they simply don't have the patronage. Interestingly, there was a 20% occupancy rate in hotels last month, which is not a surprise, of course. I mean, you go from 1 million tourists to virtually zero. But the most busy ones were those who were actually putting up people who had been compulsorily isolated because they came in from overseas and they were put there for a 14-day lockdown. So they reckon it'll take a good 18 months, possibly even longer, for the sector to come back into anything approaching the shape that we've seen it before. Obviously, the tourist towns, Queenstown, Rotorua, will be hardest hit. They think a lot of apartment-style hotels will, in fact, stop being in the will stop being in the hotel business, and they'll actually get sold off either to owner-occupiers or they'll be turned into rental apartments. We'll wait and see on that one. And really the big issues that they see is continued government support for the sector, and they'll be looking to see what happens with some big tourism events such as APEC next year and the America's Cup, which with some luck will breathe some life back into the sector. Those hoping for a splurge from a trans-Tasman bubble, we may be waiting some months on that one, I think, and I think expectations might be just a touch too high. to think that it's going to fill a lot of empty beds.
How about the numbers today, Giles, just quickly before you head off?
Share market, it started off pretty strongly, but it just ran out a bit of puff. It ended up still positive, up 32 points, about 1/3%. 10,790. That's where it was November last year. So we've regained a lot of lost ground. The Kiwi, 60.5 US cents, 92.7 Australian. And then the expectation you need to buy British pence, you'll get 49.5 of them for your Kiwi.
Thanks, Giles. That's our business editor, Giles Beckford, joining us live from the Wellington studio. President Donald Trump has made the startling admission today that he's been using an unproven drug as a preventative measure against the coronavirus. The president says he's been using hydroxychloroquine for about a week and a half after asking his doctor if he could take the drug. The US Food and Drug Administration has voiced its reservations about the drug, which can cause unusual heart rhythms for some people. But it's a drug the president has long trumpeted. Here's the ABC's Rachel Mealy.
President Trump was speaking to reporters at the White House about something they thought they'd heard before, when an answer to a question took a surprising twist.
And a lot of good things have come out about the hydroxy. A lot of good things have come out. And you'd be surprised at how many people are taking it, especially the frontline workers, before you catch it. The frontline workers, many are taking it. I happen to be taking it.
Hydroxychloroquine?
I'm taking it, hydroxychloroquine.
When?
Right now, yeah. A couple of weeks ago, I started taking it. Because I think it's good. I've heard a lot of good stories. And if it's not good, I'll tell you right. I'm not going to get hurt by it.
The US Food and Drug Administration warned last month that hydroxychloroquine was unproven as a treatment or a prevention for COVID-19 and warned that it can cause abnormalities in heart rhythm for people with the virus. The president says he's been taking the drug for the past 10 days.
So I have been taking it for about a week and a half.
Every day?
At some point, every day. I take a pill every day. At some point, I'll stop. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have the cure and or the vaccine, and that'll happen, I think, very soon.
The president's decision to take the drug may have been triggered when 2 White House staff members tested positive for the virus in early May. He says his White House doctor prescribed the drug.
I would have told you that 3-4 days ago, but we never had a chance because you never asked me the question.
Did the White House doctor recommend that you take that? Is that why you're taking it?
Yeah, White House doctor. I didn't recommend. No, I asked him, what do you think? He said, well, if you'd like it. I said, yeah, I'd like it. I'd like to take it. A lot of people are taking it. A lot of frontline workers are taking hydroxychloroquine. A lot of I don't take it because, hey, people said, oh, maybe he owns the company. No, I don't know the company. You know what? I want the people of this nation to feel good. I don't want them being sick.
Doctors and medical experts expressed alarm at the president's announcement. Even on the conservative Fox News channel, anchor Neil Koutou issued this warning.
If you are in a risky population here and you are taking this as a preventative treatment to ward off the virus, or in a worst case scenario, you are dealing with the virus, and you are in this vulnerable population, it will kill you. I cannot stress enough. This will kill you. So again, whatever benefits the president says this has, and certainly it has had for those suffering from malaria, dealing with lupus, this is a leap that should not be taken casually by those watching at home or assuming, well, the president of the United States says it's okay.
Dr. Paul Griffin is an associate professor of medicine at the University of Queensland. He says the evidence on hydroxychloroquine just doesn't stack up.
That was a drug that showed some promise initially, but when reviewed in larger studies, the evidence would suggest it's probably not effective and does carry with it some significant side effects. So while it's still in use in some clinical trials so we can gain more evidence to see whether it works or not, at this stage we'd certainly recommend not using it outside of a clinical trial situation.
And that's Queensland University's Paul Griffin ending that report by the ABC's Rachel Mealy. In breaking news, Winston Peters is appealing a High Court judgment against him, saying he now knows who leaked his pension details in the lead up to the 2017 election. We'll bring you more on this as it comes to hand. Master carvers who have dedicated their life to teaching the art of whakairo says the government's latest $7.6 million investment in the New Zealand Maori Arts and Crafts Institute will allow them to keep the art alive. The Rotorua facility, which sits within the tourist attraction Tupuia, laid off 150 staff when lockdown began, and Kaimahi say the new funding has literally saved the institute. Te Aniwa Hurehanganui is in Rotorua and filed this report.
In the carving studio at the heart of Te Puia, master carver Clive Fugel is in his element. With his head down and his arms steady, he carefully carves out the features of an ancestor. The art of whakairo is in his blood, but it was here at the New Zealand Institute of Maori Arts and Crafts in 1967 where a much younger Clive Fugel was able to perfect his craft. He says the government's $7.6 million investment over 2 years means he can continue to share it.
It means that we carry on with the legacy that we've been set up to do under an act of parliament, passing on the knowledge of carving to a younger generation. Because we bring young men in from all over the country to learn this art. The idea is to take it back to their own communities and pass it on so it won't get lost.
The New Zealand Maori Arts and Crafts Institute is usually funded primarily by the Te Puia tourism operation, but border restrictions have cut off more than 90% of its visitors and forced it to close its doors. The Prime Minister says the new funding will go directly to the Institute.
That funding is specifically for the Institute here and the work that is done here. We have $400 million overall that we're working alongside the tourism industry to make sure that we have an industry that continues to survive and thrive in the longer term. The wage subsidy, of course, is on top of that.
The future of tourism at Te Puia remains uncertain, but General Manager Edaya Keel says the $7.6 million is going to allow the Institute to open while the borders remain closed.
Having staff and students back, that is our priority for New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts Institute, that we can continue to do that. Today means that we can carry on and fulfil those hopes and aspirations that our ancestors had for us.
And with the memory of having to lay off 80% of staff still fresh in his mind, the support has come at a crucial time.
Really somber times, it was really tough. In a matter of a week, we just had to close our doors. And to have the Prime Minister come here today and her ministers and to recognise that we are a legacy cornerstone foundation for our country is really humbling.
The New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts Institute first opened its doors in 1926 under the guidance of Sir Apirana Ngata, who saw value in advancing traditional art like carving and weaving. Clive Fugel says COVID-19 cast doubt on whether that legacy could continue.
Like everybody else, we were all very uneasy about the whole thing because you didn't know whether we were going to carry on with our wānanga, our schools, because we're passing on a very important heritage. As Sir Apirana Ngata once said, he says, it belongs potentially to all of us.
Edaya Keel says the Institute could be up and running within the next few months. For Checkpoint, I'm Te Aniwa Hurehanganui.
It is 13 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It could take more than 5 years for international air travel to bounce back, and countries enforcing quarantine periods aren't helping, according to IATA. The International Air Transport Association wants what it calls harmonised border controls, where countries collectively agree to rules aimed at protecting against COVID-19, including temperature checks at airports, masks on planes and instant tests when they become available. But IATA opposes mandatory isolation like the 2 weeks New Zealand enforces for travellers returning home from overseas, and it maintains conditions on a plane are safer than shopping at the mall or going into the office when it comes to the spread of COVID-19. I spoke to IATA's Asia spokesperson, Albert Chung, about
We're expecting recovery to be slow. So we've developed two scenarios. In the very first scenario, which is the more optimistic scenario, we expect domestic markets to open in the third quarter of the year at a much slower phased opening of international markets. We don't expect 2019 levels to be exceeded until 2023. That's a couple of years from now. And even by 2025, global passenger demand is still expected to be 10% below what we had originally forecasted for the year in 2019. That's the more optimistic scenario. There's also a pessimistic scenario where if the opening of economies and the relaxation of travel restrictions is slow, with lockdowns extending into the third quarter of the year, then even by 2021, we expect passenger demand to be 34% below 2019 levels.
What is it that is keeping it from bouncing back more quickly? Is it health concerns? Is it that people don't want to spend the money when things are uncertain? Because economies are expected to come back much quicker than what you're expecting aviation to.
So there are a couple of factors. One is confidence in air travel. The other factor would be in terms of the state of the economy. People will be concerned that if the economy isn't going to do well, then finances would be a consideration to determine whether or not they travel.
New Zealand has compulsory quarantine and isolation at the moment. So anyone entering the country has to spend 2 weeks in isolation. Now, IATA doesn't support quarantine. Why?
So we've done a survey of travellers, and we found that if arrival quarantine measures are in place, travellers will not have the confidence in wanting to travel. There's no incentive to travel because if you are travelling and you're stuck in a quarantine compound for about 2 weeks, then that really reduces any incentive to want to travel. Which is why what we are proposing is to have a layered approach of biosecurity measures, where there are measures in place at the departing airport, on in-flight, there are measures at the arrival airport. So it's a layered approach to ensure that there are biosecurity measures in place to protect the health and safety of travellers.
Like what, though? Because people are deeply concerned about the risks associated with COVID-19. What would minimise that? What are you suggesting specifically?
So in the layered approach, we are looking at things, for example, temperature screening at airports. We are to have a robust system of health declarations and vigorous contact tracing procedures. In flight, we are recommending the use of face coverings or masks while in the aircraft to simplify boarding and deplaning process, the processes for boarding and deplaning such that it reduces contact between passengers and crew, even simplifying catering procedures while on board the aircraft to lower the crew movement and interaction with passengers.
But you don't support social distancing. So at the moment in New Zealand, we do have social distancing on public transport, including it's supposed to be on planes. So is that simply because it's not financially viable for airlines to implement social distancing?
So there are a couple of factors why the risk of transmission on board the aircraft has been low. So unlike other modes of transport, everybody sitting in the aircraft faces forward. And there's limited face-to-face interaction. Seats actually provide a physical barrier or to the transmission from the back to the front of between the back and the front of the aircraft. Even the airflow within the aircraft, within the cabin, is from the ceiling to the floor. Hence, it reduces any potential for transmission forward or back in the cabin. Even with the air circulation system itself, the cabin air is clean to the level of an operating theatre quality. So hence the risk, even currently, the risk of transmission is low. Added to that measure, the use of face masks and coverings, it will reduce the risk even lower. Hence, we are not recommending keeping the middle seats empty.
So can you compare it to any other activities, like the risk of flying, for example, compared to shopping at the local mall or going into the office? Which is riskier?
the risk is definitely lower in an aircraft cabin, given the quality of the air, given the physical barriers that are in the aircraft, given the nature in which people are seated in the aircraft facing forward, the risk is lower.
New Zealand is in a situation where it has one domestic carrier, Air New Zealand, and I know that IATA has done a lot regarding refunds and passengers wanting refunds. At the moment, Air New Zealand is locked in a rather large battle with its customers wanting refunds. What is your position on that?
The airline industry is in crisis mode. This year, we are expecting 314 billion in revenue loss for the airline industry. If in the second quarter of the year alone, airlines are expected to burn about 61 billion of their cash. So it's an unprecedented situation that the airlines are in. What they need to do is to conserve their cash so that they can survive. And why states need the airlines to survive is because airlines provide and support the economic development of countries. So what countries will need is a viable airline industry when we get out of the COVID-19 crisis. So it's really to help the survival of the airlines in this very unprecedented crisis.
And that is Albert Chung, and he is IATA's Asia spokesperson. And as we reported last night, the Queensland Premier says it could be September before her state's borders reopen to tourists. That news has left some tourism operators in Queensland reeling. They say they are calling on the state government to move sooner so they don't miss out on what should be peak season. The issue is exposing a rift on Australia's state borders as other premiers call on Queensland to let people in. Here's the ABC's Barbara Miller.
It's that time of year when normally the grey nomads are embarking on the great migration north.
Most of our customers are Victorian and New South Welshman. Yeah, and they're all repeat customers and they're all ready to come. They're just waiting on the border to open, but if it doesn't open, they won't be here this year and we'll be basically empty, I guess.
Rob Handel runs the Wonga Beach Caravan Park north of Port Douglas. He's torn about news that the state border could be closed for months yet.
On a personal note, probably that would be right, but on a business note, it's going to hurt us immensely.
Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says the reopening of the border will be reviewed monthly.
It should be better to have a date. You can't start up overnight.
Steve Edmondson is the owner of Sail Away Reef and Island Tours in Port Douglas.
We're very disappointed that they take a choice to review it after 4 weeks when effectively we will miss out all of that high season. Absolutely stunned and devastated.
LNP MP Warren Ench, whose Leichhardt electorate takes in Cairns and Port Douglas, says for now he backs the Premier's call.
I've got to say that she's done a pretty good job in managing this situation. And, I'm not going to go out there and attack her because of the politics.
Well, given we've got so few new cases in each of the states, do we need to speed up the reopening between states?
Look, you're right, but why have we got so few cases? We've got so few cases because we've been very, very disciplined overall. Suddenly we open it up, we end up like bloody Brazil, or the US for that matter.
The WA Premier Mark McGowan has also indicated he's in no hurry to reopen the state's border. That's bitter news for Jeff Hard, who runs Cellar Door Winery Tours in the Margaret River region.
We have not had income for 2 going on 3 months, not a zac. Nothing.
The Federal Tourism Minister Simon Birmingham is urging the states to move sooner. In a statement to AM, Simon Birmingham said if the successful suppression of COVID-19 continues, then the states should be relaxing their border controls. If 1 or 2 states were to hold out, the statement continues, then they will be answerable to their tourism industry and will ultimately need to provide additional support to that industry. With the debate over schools now largely put to rest, the issue of state borders is emerging as the next flashpoint between governments.
And that's Barbara Miller from the ABC with that report. Now, further to a story we ran earlier in the program about the charity Bellyful that's trying to get $12,000 back from Air New Zealand after cancelling flights cancellations. Well, Air New Zealand has got in touch to say that they are going to review the situation and will get back in touch with the Bellyful team. A lot of you have got in touch about Air New Zealand. This person says, Air New Zealand are a delinquent airline. As a travel agent, I find they are arrogant and have immoral behaviour. Another, Air New Zealand should have the right to use the name New Zealand, stripped from them for their appalling treatment of both staff and customers. Shirley says Air New Zealand should stop holding on to passengers' money. They're gaining interest whilst charities and volunteer organisations struggle. Why can't we get Air New Zealand's CEO to give his $1 million salary to those affected? Another person saying they're totally frustrated with Air New Zealand, can't get a hold of anyone on the 0800 number, can't leave a message, have no way to see the credit they've been given, no way to view the original booking that's now been cancelled. And they are saying that I've messaged on WhatsApp to Air New Zealand, no response from that either. Disgraceful and extremely disappointing, they say.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Winston Peters is going back to court to appeal against a High Court decision over the leak of his pension details. The New Zealand First Leader now claims he knows who the leak came from, something that could not be proved during last year's court proceedings. The information was leaked to the media ahead of the 2017 general election. Mr Peters says that despite there being around 51,000 people who have made a mistake on their superannuation since 1976, only a single case has ever made the headlines. He says the information was leaked with an intent to do harm, and he is persisting with the case on behalf of everyone who's had their privacy breached. Auckland Council has asked all staff earning more than $100,000 a year to consider taking a pay cut. The Council's Chief Executive Stephen Town says staff have been asked to consider a 6-month reduction in salary. The authority has also begun reviewing its permanent workforce. Staff earning between $100,000 and $175,000 have been asked to consider a 5% cut, and those earning up to $275,000, 7.5%. Those earning more than $275,000 have been asked to consider a 10% reduction. Mr Town says the council is also talking to the Public Service Association on whether to cancel or limit the annual staff pay review. A children's charity says it's been left with $12,000 worth of unwanted Air New Zealand credits after the pandemic forced it to cancel a training conference in Christchurch this weekend. The charity, Bellyful, wants a refund, but the airline announced yesterday it will only be doing that for some cancelled international flights. CEO Charlotte Delahunty told Checkpoint the credits are useless because they can only be used in the name of the person travelling and the money is needed elsewhere.
We're forecasting a 30% drop in revenue for the year, which when you've only got 4 people working part-time all around New Zealand, it's going to be job cuts. It's the only other option left to us now.
Charlotte Delahunty from the charity Bellyful. The former Prime Minister Jim Bolger has sung the praises of the National MP Todd Muller, saying he has the right attributes to be leader. Mr Muller, who used to work in Mr Bolger's office, has been touted as potential leader of the National Party as Simon Bridges struggles to get cut through. A poll released last night saw National dive more than 12 points to just 30.6% support. Mr Bolger has told Checkpoint Todd Muller has all the skills to do the job if he is asked to step up.
Todd has the ability to work well with all across the world, across the line. He's not that harsh partisan position. He will work with others to achieve the right goal.
Jim Bolger says the dramatic poll will have prompted a lot of soul searching. The Hawke's Bay community will receive $500,000 from the government to tackle a once-in-a-lifetime drought. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor announced a $500,000 contribution to the Hawke's Bay Mayoral Drought Relief Fund in Hastings today. Mr O'Connor says this is part of a multi-million-dollar countrywide package from the government.
We have contributed about $17 million to drought support across the country, but still there are some acute needs, particularly here in the Hawke's Bay, where farmers are struggling just to feed their animals.
Damien O'Connor will spend tomorrow visiting affected farms. Australia's government says it's not interested in a tit-for-tat trade war after China slapped huge tariffs on Australian barley. The ABC's Stephanie Dalzell reports.
They're very different players, so that's a real strength of ours. It's just, exciting.
That was not the correct audio. We'll have that in the next bulletin. It's now 6:04. The Mystics Shooting Circle has lost nearly 100 games of experience after Silver Fern Bailey Mess confirmed she will sit out the upcoming ANZ Premiership season due to knee surgery. 3 teenagers, Grace Nweke, Saviour Tui and new signing Asher Grapes, will share the goal shooting responsibilities when the domestic netball competition returns next month. Mess plans to be back next season and says the youngsters are up to the challenge of the revamped 2020 competition. The All Black and Crusaders captain Scott Barrett has re-signed with New Zealand Rugby until 2023. The 26-year-old utility forward says the disappointment of the All Blacks' 2019 World Cup campaign has motivated him to stick around until the next World Cup in France. And a cast of top drivers will race in a virtual 24 Hours of Le Mans next month, but the head of the World Endurance Championship, Gerard Neveu, says the real-life version must also happen this year with or without spectators. The race, now in its 88th edition, was attended by 250,000 people last year. It has been rescheduled from mid-June to mid-September due to COVID-19, but whether it will be held then and with a crowd remains unclear. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, how COVID-19 has sent backwards the country's goals on waste, with more packaging going to landfill and concerns about the viability of recycling. Jessica Helfand on how our faces have been presented and judged over the centuries. Does rising unemployment mean fewer jobs for people with disabilities? And Yardna Saw wishes Stevie Wonder a belated happy 70th. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow in the west from Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine, isolated showers about the east coasts of Northland and Coromandel. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms this afternoon and evening. Just a few light showers tomorrow. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, isolated showers clearing tomorrow morning, leaving fine spells. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine isolated showers in Bulla until tomorrow afternoon, cloud increasing tomorrow evening. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland except Stewart Island, mainly fine, areas of fog overnight and tomorrow morning. Fiordland and Stewart Island, cloud increasing tonight, patchy drizzle developing tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:07.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Northland schools have the lowest attendance rates post the COVID-19 lockdown, with one only getting about a quarter of its students back. 800,000 students were due back in class yesterday for the first full day of school. On average, attendance was 79%, and that's gone up 2% today. Secretary for Education Iona Holstead says iwi remain worried about the spread of coronavirus. There's also anxiety about catching the bus, and some families may have moved to find work.
I think the worst case that I've heard was around 29%. So there may be others, but that's the one that's come to my attention. And I know that in that particular school it's gone up to 50% today. So that's all good. It's gone up overall as an average by 1% today. And it's gone up about 4 or 5%, I think, for early learning.
What areas regionally have the worst attendance rates at the moment?
The far north.
Can you tell us a little about... what are you seeing there?
Oh, as I say, that's where the lowest occurred. And we had very, very low rates there during the level 3 alert period as well. Look, there's a range of reasons for that. As you will have heard, many iwi are really quite concerned about any form of infectious disease. They have very horrific stories that they've experienced from the 1918 flu. There's anxiety of that sort. There'll be anxiety about travel. A lot of those kids will travel by bus. So if they're a little bit more anxious, that adds another block in the way, if you like. In other cases, some of those families will have been disrupted. So, for example, forestry was impacted first by this disease in terms of workers, and a lot of forestry workers up the far north. So we're not even necessarily sure that all of those children will actually have stayed up there. So some of these things are going to have to play out over the next week or so.
So when you say the worst case scenario was 29% attendance, what other sort of numbers did you have from that area?
Oh, sorry, I just picked out the lowest number when I thought you'd be interested in that. So I can't give you all of the details. I can give that to you another time if you like. I can go through and get that. But
okay. So how are you going to get these students back? What's the plan?
Yeah. Look, we've spent the last week or so, talking a lot to principals about this, because for some principals they'll be fine. They'll know exactly what to do, and they'll have connections with those family in a way that will bring them back quicker than not. For others, they will need some help, and so we might, for example, connect them with iwi or with hapu. We might use, in South Auckland, for example, it may be that we'll connect them with Polynesian churches. We'll use a variety of contact points to encourage these families back. It is really important that our young people get back connected to school. Obviously, we're not going to be trying to do that immediately because we are conscious that some people have got anxieties, but we don't want to let it drag on either.
So the Minister has said he wants leniency, but as you say, the longer kids are away, the more likely they are to stay away. So how long is there going to be leniency for?
Well, there'll be leniency in the sense that we don't want to do more harm than good. But I would expect that in the next couple of weeks we'll be in a position to be a bit firmer about that.
How many kids do you think you have lost for good, whether they've gone off to work or bring in money to the household that may be struggling, or it's just too hard for them now?
Yeah, it's a really hard question. It's a really important question, Lisa. And it's one that I know is bothering principals too, because they're concerned particularly about those children who might have left to go to work. We did hear some stories about that happening during the lockdown phase. So literally they've been back at school 2 days. Teachers and principals will be assessing exactly that question, and we'll have a much better picture of that by the end of the week, beginning of next week.
Catching these kids up. NCEA timetables obviously have been pushed out, giving them a few extra weeks, but some principals are really concerned that some of their kids just will not be able to catch up. What can you do about that, especially for university entrance going to uni next year?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the most important thing is to attend to wellbeing at the moment. So, first of all, come and try and stay calm. The New Zealand Qualifications Authority is actually talking with Universities New Zealand as to whether or not there needs to be any changes to the requirements for UE this year in light of COVID. So that's an ongoing discussion, and I think that they've had quite productive engagement there.
So there is a possibility, because this is important, there is a possibility of a shift in the criteria. For example, one college in Wellington is asking for the normal requirements to be waived for university next year. So will there be some movement around that, do you think?
I don't think would be any suggestion of waiving anything at all. I think open entry was what she was suggesting.
Yes.
And I wouldn't expect that to be the discussion that NZQA is having, but it's possibly something you need to talk better with them about.
Have they given you any indication about whether there will be a shift in the criteria?
Well, that's for the universities. Universities New Zealand has to agree to that. So that's what New Zealand Qualifications Authority is discussing with Universities New Zealand is what, if anything, could or should be done.
In terms of catching the students up, how can you do that?
Yeah, well, there's a number of ways. I mean, first of all, NCA is very flexible. The second thing is that a huge number of kids actually end up with far more credits than they actually need to get NCA. So actually working through with students about what they actually need to do is the first thing. And teachers are familiar with doing that.
You say you're going to have a better picture of the situation nearer the end of the week or over the next few weeks. When you find out how many students have left to take up work, are you going to try and get those ones back?
That's a hard thing to do. Once they've left school, they've left school. I mean, it's not... We would hope that it's not probably our priority because people are entitled to exercise the right to leave school at a certain age, and they do so every week. And often there are children who we would rather not be leaving school at that time, but that is their right. So we'll be prioritising attention onto those children who are expected to be at school.
That was Iona Holstead, and as promised, the Ministry of Education did get in touch with those attendance numbers from today, and they show in Tai Tokerau, well, that was the lowest number of students returning at 72% on average. Highest attendance rates were Nelson Marlborough and West Coast at 90%, the same rate as Otago and Southland. Auckland schools on average had 77% of their students in class today. The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, is going back to court to appeal the High Court decision over the leak of his pension details. Mr Peters now claims he knows who the leak came from, something that could not be proved during last year's court proceedings. He says he is not persisting with the case just for himself, but for all people who have had their privacy breached. Mr Peters has just spoken with our political reporter, Joe Moyer.
Well, it's not just about my privacy, it's about the privacy of anyone who's had their rights breached in this matter. It's a foundation stone of our society and of democracy, and without it, we look forward to a very bleak future as a country. So it's a serious issue, and it's worth defending.
You've also said in your statement that you know who the leak is. Is that a new development, or have you known that all along but were unable to prove it last time round?
Look, I'm not going to breach the sub judice rule by talking about those sorts of things. You've got my statement, and that's about all I can say on it.
There's been a lot of criticism about the $1 million that it cost the taxpayer the last time round. Are you concerned about that this time with appealing it?
Look, I ran the wine box inquiry for years, never got subsidised or any money for that. It saved this country's treasury billions of dollars in stopping tax evasion in our country. And with respect to people who raised that, what were they to think when that massive amount of money was preserved for the Treasury that they had been losing? That's what the point is. The point is a matter of law, and that the law be applied properly.
So how's this process going to work? What's the timeline with your appeal?
Look, I've got no idea. But the last day for lodgement was on Monday, and it's been lodged.
Right, so is this something that could potentially play out at the same time as the election then?
Look, no one in my position or in this sort of position has any control over the court process. Any sort of insinuation like that would be wrong because, as I say, it's in the hands of others.
And that was Winston Peters speaking to political reporter Joe Moyer. It is another day of no new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand. There have been no more deaths and 2 people remain in hospital. But New Zealand's overall tally has increased by 4 to 1,503, as the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, explains.
These cases are people who returned to New Zealand from the Greg Mortimer cruise ship back in April, 13th of April. And they had all tested positive for COVID-19 in Uruguay before they came back. They had been classified as under investigation while we were awaiting information from Uruguay to avoid them being double counted as part of the overall World Health Organization numbers. We've now confirmed with our counterparts in Uruguay that they did not report those cases, so we are.
He says it's not necessarily an unusual situation.
Each country has what they call a focal point under the international health regulations, and that focal point is responsible for the reporting to and communication with the World Health Organization. So when a situation like this arises, and we've had it on a few occasions with Australia as well, where we've had cases here, for example, around the Hereford Cattle Conference, where people went back to Australia, they were subsequently found to be infected. So we liaise with their focal points just to determine who is doing the reporting. In this case, Uruguay, we confirmed hadn't reported, so we've taken that upon ourselves then to report those confirmed cases.
Ashley Bloomfield says all 4 of the cases from the Greg Mortimer have since recovered. It is 18 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Italy has been one of the worst affected countries in Europe, with nearly 32,000 deaths from the coronavirus. However, in recent weeks, the numbers have been consistently falling. And now, after a 10-week strict national lockdown, shops, restaurants, bars and hairdressers have been opening up. The BBC's Mark Lowen has more from Milan.
A plea for guidance as they emerge from the darkness. In Milan, where Europe's coronavirus plague exploded, they came today for solace to the first Mass since public church services resumed after the world's longest national lockdown. This parish alone has lost 80 people. A 2,000-year-old church now has new traditions. The communion wafer is passed between unsullied hands, no longer directly on the tongue, but the palm, not a tissue. For some, it's hard to adjust.
It's a bit strange to hold the body of Christ with the gloves, but it's important that people can come here to regain spiritual and moral strength after all this suffering.
For the faithful, a relief. It seems like a new world, he says. To start again like this is so moving. We missed it. I felt so good, this lady says, but emotions stop any more words. It's been a long 10 weeks for hairdressers and beauty salons, for restaurants and cafes, and for shops like Italy's oldest department store, appropriately named Rinascente, Rebirth.
The new regulations are pretty strict. Everybody coming in has the temperature checked. Grazie. Staff use an app to show them how many customers are in the store at any one time. There are hand sanitizing points everywhere. And no more testing of makeup. And upstairs, there's more.
Changing rooms are disinfected after each use, and clothes tried on aren't put back, but are taken to a separate room, themselves quarantined. This, too, is helping Italy's recovery. A hotel used to isolate infected cases as they wait to test negative, further halting the spread. After 20 days here, Jacqueline is ready to go home. A step closer to this country healing.
The BBC's Mark Lowen there. Meanwhile, having continued with a stricter lockdown than England, Northern Ireland is moving to relax it more than any other parts of the UK. From tomorrow, groups up to six people, not from the same household, will be able to meet outdoors, drive into church services and cinemas as well. The BBC's Emma Vardy has more from Belfast.
Belfast's been like a ghost town, but it's about to come back to life. People in Northern Ireland are to be allowed more social interaction than anywhere in the UK. From tomorrow, up to 6 people from different households will be able to meet up outdoors, far more than in England, where you can only meet one other person from another house. The Northern Ireland executive said it's down to changing scientific advice. It believes there's much less chance of the virus being passed on outdoors, so it will now allow drive-through church services, cinemas and concerts, golf and tennis to restart. Much of this ahead of anywhere else in the UK.
We are told that outdoor activities are able to be accommodated because the virus doesn't spread as easily outdoors as indoors, and so we have been told that we will revisit this issue again, and we will. It'll be kept under constant review.
We do understand that whenever people look to the pathway document which we set out, where in that first phase we had identified that families perhaps could get together, so we understand that people would be disappointed. People are desperate to get together.
Northern Ireland had been moving more slowly than England in lifting its restrictions. Now that's starting to change, but it's still a balancing act. Leaving things too long could mean an even greater effect on the economy, while political leaders here still worry that moving faster could see the transmission of the virus starting to rise again.
There's a nice fish.
Anglers arrived here at dawn as fishing lakes and garden centres were also reopened.
Take it out today. It's better than a lottery win, and it's a medicine that you can do without a prescription.
And queues formed outside recycling centres.
Do you mind if I ask the purpose of your trip, please?
from home.
Across the border in the Republic of Ireland, people are still not allowed to travel more than 5 kilometres from home. But Northern Ireland has no such limit. Despite today's changes, people both north and south of this island are still urged to be cautious. Northern Ireland is now further ahead than its neighbours, but a second spike in infections could see it all reversed.
The BBC's Emma Vardy with that report. Taxpayers could end up being liable if a ship laden with 40,000 barrels of crude oil, which is sitting just 50 kilometres off the Taranaki coast, is involved in a spill. The FPSO Umuroa is a floating production station attached to the abandoned Tui oil field. It's been ordered to stay put over winter against its owners' wishes, who have argued doing so poses a safety risk. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
The Umuroa is owned by Norwegian-listed company BW Offshore. It was contracted to Tamarind Taranaki, a subsidiary of Singapore-based Tamarind Resources, which went belly up after an unsuccessful drilling campaign at the Tui field late last year. It owes creditors more than $300 million, including about $100 million to the government for its share of decommissioning costs at Tui. BW Offshore wanted to detach the Umuroa from the Tui field in accordance with a 2017 Environmental Protection Authority decision. But the EPA lodged an urgent appeal earlier this year, citing Tamarind Taranaki's liquidation as a change in circumstance. In a decision released last month, the High Court ordered the Umuroa to stay in place until it could be safely removed. The Chief Financial Officer of BW Offshore, Stoila Andreasen, says the company's position hasn't changed.
More and more aging unit, and we believe the safest of all options would be to disconnect as we plan to do and remove the vessel from the field. So although we don't think there's any immediate threat, we believe that that's the safest option.
Mr. Andreasen says BW Offshore has maintained a skeleton crew of about 30 on board Umuroa and has burned about 10,000 barrels of oil using it as fuel. He says the company is owed about $150 million by Tamarind Taranaki and has racked up costs of close to $30 million since Tui's former operator went bust. Mr. Andreasen doesn't believe that BW Offshore will be liable if an accident was to occur while the Umuroa is connected to the Tui field.
We don't see that fall under our liability. It's liability of the operator. The crew belongs to the operator as such. So we're just going to maintain the unit. The authorities come up with a solution for demobilization.
The field's operator is now the government, which recently took over ownership of Tui. It's contracted the UK company Petrofac to organise the field's decommissioning. In a statement, the Energy and Resources Minister, Megan Woods, says New Zealand operates a polluter pays regime and owners have unlimited liability for the cost of pollution damage from their facilities. Ms Woods acknowledges that if there is a spill involving the Umuroa, the government could find itself liable.
Depending on the source of the spill and the activities ongoing at the time of the spill, liability could rest with either the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment, with BW Offshore, or with both operators. Such a determination would depend on the outcome of an investigation and subsequent findings.
Minister Woods says the High Court considered the risks when it ruled the Umuroa had to stay attached to the Tui field. She says she respects the view of Justice Cook, who considered that a well-established operator like BW Offshore would be able to make the Umuroa safe over the winter months. Climate Justice Taranaki researcher Catherine Chung says any spill could have a devastating effect on the marine environment.
We had much smaller spills in previous years, and we found oil bores on the Kapiti coast from relatively small spills from this side and from the Maori field. So we know that oil spill can travel a long way. 40,000 barrels, if that is the real figure, it is a huge amount.
Ms Chung says the situation with the Tui field gives further weight to the argument put forward by the former Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Jan Wright, in 2014. She argued that oil and gas companies should be made to pay a levy to cover the decommissioning and clean-up costs of their operations. I Taranaki mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin ahau.
Let's get to some of your feedback. We'll start with Air New Zealand. This is on people wanting to get refunds rather than credits. And the charity Ballyful, who's got a $12,000 credit with Air New Zealand that they desperately want refunded so that they can use in their work. This person says Ballyful should be given air points instead of personal specific credits. And could Air New Zealand not pull all credits for cancelled flights straight into customers' air points accounts? Then they would be visible and accessible, this person says. Keith has got in touch to say Air New Zealand is a national disgrace. I hope a class action is taken against them on behalf of all ticket holders. And this one from Mark. Air New Zealand is shaping up as the travel industry equivalent of Southern Response. Worse, actually, Mark says, because Southern Response never had long-standing loyal customers. It is truly amazing that Air New Zealand is willing to burn hard-won loyalty over many years with a flagrant approach to keeping payment for service they can't or won't provide. Ray's got in touch. We spoke to him earlier about his refund. He says the Air New Zealand website says it's building a way so that you can access your credits and book online. Ray says in capital letters, how long will it take to bloody build the thing? Hope to get you an answer, Ray. On the subject of Simon Bridges' leadership, this person says, leave Simon alone. He's facing a very popular Prime Minister, as Labour did when John Key was Prime Minister. Labour looked weak and desperate when they chopped and changed their leaders. It took Winston Peters to elect Jacinda, Julia says. This person says Simon Bridges is doing a great job. No way National can get elected with him there. Thanks for getting in touch, Roland. And finally, this one. Would love to give you feedback on National Party leadership, and as soon as there is some, I will certainly do so. Thanks for your feedback this evening, and thank you for joining us. Don't forget you can check out all our stories online, including our video stories. We will be back again tomorrow evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Winston Peters will appeal against a High Court decision over the leak of his pension details, claiming he now knows the source. Auckland Council has asked all high-earning staff to consider taking a pay cut. A children's charity has been left with $12,000 worth of unwanted Air New Zealand credits after the pandemic forced it to cancel an event. And the Prime Minister says the government is considering some new public holidays to encourage domestic tourism. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7. Then it's Nights with Brian Crump.
Tonight on Nights, Kirsten Johnstone hosts her final song crush. We've got a window on the world of Boris Johnson. And our philosopher Anne Kerwin joins us for a talk on compassion and community in a world changed by COVID-19. Will the pandemic make us kinder? Was that just a brief window, an increasingly self-interest?